Okay. So this is Mark Creekmore, and we're with NAMI Washtenaw County, and we're going to talk about creative activity and mental health, and what it means to our mental health and our experiences. So first, we're going to introduce ourselves. Ashley, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a second year Masters of Social Work student and also an intern with Fresh Start Clubhouse.
Okay. Barb?
Yeah, so I'm the longtime office manager for NAMI Washtenaw County, and she, her pronouns. And I've just am anxious to start talking about how creativity is related to mental illness
Okay.
or mental health conditions.
Now, Taylor.
Hi, I'm Taylor Martell. I am a member at Fresh Start Clubhouse, and I'm also a board member at Fresh Start Clubhouse.
Oh, great. And I'm Mark Creekmore. I'm sort of the advocacy lead for NAMI Washtenaw County, and I'm on the board. So let's start and just give examples and say what a creative activity we've done and what it's meant to us. Want to go around the same order? Ashley, you want to start?
Sure. So I like to do a lot of different forms of art, including painting, dancing, and poetry. Painting, when I was younger, I used to do a lot of like finger painting and watercoloring, and now I've kind of shifted into like oil paints and acrylic paints. And I really love painting because I feel like it teleports me to another dimension, and I can paint for hours and hours and just really like be immersed in it. Poetry for me is like very cathartic and helps me to process a lot of emotions and work through things. And then dancing just kind of allows me to express myself in whatever way. Usually I just dance in my living room by myself and just have a good time. So yeah, those are my experiences with art.
Great, thank you. Barb?
Okay, well, I don't know where to begin. I go back many years, but the first time I was hospitalized was in the 70s, and I was in the hospital for 6 months at that time. And one of the big things that I remember was the OT room, or the occupational therapy room, where we did different kinds of arts and crafts. And it was a place where I could actually focus and do something and come up with something. And if you go way, way, way back in history, occupational therapy was something that the Greeks did with people who had mental health conditions. And it's a way of engaging someone in activity that gives them a sense of well-being, I guess, or can help with that. So I know one time I was admitted to the hospital, and I don't remember when or where or whatever. I just remember I woke up extremely, extremely angry. I think what they had done had restrained me and given me a shot of antipsychotic medication. And I made a collage afterwards, and it said, "Even Rough Riders carry teddy bears." And It was just a way of, I mean, I couldn't explain to anybody what was happening or what, you know, what I was thinking and all that, but the art allowed me to express the emotion that I was feeling.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, my experience has been with difficulty with words and not being able to express myself verbally. And art has always been something that I've been doing since I was a little girl. I remember listening to the radio when I was 3 or 4 years old, and they had this competition to send in a drawing. And I took a nickel, a quarter, yeah, I think it was just a nickel, a quarter, and I traced around the nickel and then traced around the bottom. And I had a circle and a larger circle, and then I put 2 ears on the smaller circle and called it a pig. And I don't think I ever sent it into the radio station, but it was just a memory that I have that you know, it was something that I liked to do. So yeah. So Taylor?
Yeah, I have really enjoyed developing a creative practice to help me with my mental health challenges. It helps me cope effectively with my thoughts and my feelings and emotions that I'm going through. I find it very healing to be able to explore what's going on in my mind that way. I also find that it really gives me a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, something to do when I wake up every day. You know, something that's on that to-do list that makes life worth living. And I find that it really helps me get to know myself better and just like what I'm going through and what emotions are kind of swimming around inside. It just helps organize that.
Great. Well, I appreciate hearing everything you've said about this. When I was little, I did 2 forms of art. One was to play the violin, and the other was to paint. When my aunt was an amateur painter, and both of those were highly structured. You know, in order to make any kind of decent sound on a violin, you have to really practice it quite a lot. So it was a source of stress for me, quite a lot of stress actually. But there was a point at which practicing was in a way transforming to me, because I would have this intense focus on what I was doing and lose track of what I was doing and what I was thinking, and kind of got outside myself and focused on the sound and getting it right, and working over a phrase or a piece of music. And the same thing happened in a way with painting. I remember very distinctly the sense that and I did this with oils, but I also did some work with acrylics, Ashley, is that oh shoot. Sorry. I remember the sense of getting a set of colors and doing a painting where you would do a little bit of a color at a time, and it wasn't until you got the whole picture before you really got the colors balanced correctly. You would think you would do a jug or a still life of some kind, and you would get the color of the jug as well as you could, and then you go on to another piece of the still life. And it wasn't until you got them all together that it made any sense. So there was a kind of sequence of having to do it all at once in order to get it balanced. So those are some of my early experiences. So that's really interesting examples of it. So let's just brainstorm about what you do now with your art and how it, how it, you know, Ashley, you sort of said you use it consciously as a way of, and so did you, Taylor, of working through and getting into a certain frame of mind.
Mhm.
Can you say more about that and give an example, a recent example, maybe describe it?
Taylor, would you like to go first?
Sure. So recently, I've been trying to incorporate some creative practice into each of my days. And whether that's, you know, I love drawing and painting. I love fibers and sewing, and even things just like trying to shift my mood and get outside of myself. You know, grabbing chalks and going outside on a nice sunny day. Just giving myself that opportunity to explore and to also just be with myself and with the emotions that come up.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I really like how Taylor's mentioning like an increased self-awareness and this like self-reflection. That I find that similar for me, that like when I'm either writing this poetry or painting, that I really get to sit with my thoughts. And especially, you know, during COVID, there's so many different stressors of life and like so many things on the to-do list and lots of different thoughts about, you know, others and thoughts about the world. But like art is that like space to like process all of that for me. And that's why I find it really just really powerful tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting. I don't know if I told Mark about this or not before, but I think I showed you the picture that I had watercolored of my experience with medicine called Haldol. And I was working on it. And at the time, my next door neighbor's little girl, Ashley, came over and she started to paint. And she was like maybe 4 or 5, I think, at the time.
Mm.
And we just had a really great time. I didn't persist in the painting because I thought, you know, it was, for me, it was just a way of, you know, putting down some things that I had been going through. But so we kind of, instead of continuing to paint, we made little desks out of odd pieces of wood that I had in the basement. And you know, it was just a way to be with somebody and do something that you enjoy.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things that I've done since I was a kid was photography, and
Mm.
my brother was and I had a darkroom when we were little,
Mm.
and this was in the day when all photography was emulsion film photography, not digital. So you would have to develop the rolls of film, and then you would enlarge them, and using an enlarger and chemicals and the like. And so that was it was such a long process, and it was such a solitary process. It was all in the dark for the most part. And actually there was a tactile process where you had to load the film strip into a canister. And it had to be, if the sides of the film touched each other, it wouldn't develop properly. So you had to load it into a circular kind of shell thing. And but you had to be completely in the dark. So it was a very you couldn't see, absolutely couldn't see anything, and you had to do it entirely by touch. And then you never, there was such a long process between when you took a picture, finished the film, which was in 36 shots or 24 shots, and then you would take it to the dark room and set out a set of time like up to 4 hours, and then you'd load it, and then you process it using chemicals, and then stop the processing and fix it so that it was permanent. And then you could take it out after it was fixed, and you could see whether you had a negative. Up to that point, you didn't know if it worked. So it was this, and then when you enlarged it, you'd have to let the thing dry, and you put it into an enlarger, and you could use some light in enlargement, a yellow light, which was, the paper was not sensitive to light. So it was all together, you could spend 6 or 8 hours for the most part in the dark, and it was such a long process. And then there was a kind of process for enlarging where you could accentuate certain parts of the photograph by giving them more light in the enlarger, so that you could take a mediocre photograph and make it you could make it spectacular just by giving it more exposure to light. So it was, and now it's completely different because you can take as many pictures as you wish. The feedback is immediate. You can see the pictures immediately. And I suppose although they're more like the light quality of pictures, I mean, you can have color rather than black and white. So it's a completely different experience. When I was at an institution for delinquent boys, I was working there, and I taught. They had a dark room, so I taught these kids how to do photography. We'd take pictures and go through the whole process. So it was a way of really getting to know somebody really well, because you could spend all this time with them, either taking pictures or in the dark room, and then following it up. It was unlike any other process that I can think of that was extended over such a long period of time, and you could really get to know people pretty well. It was a lot of fun. So, and then of course you could sort of tell a story, talk about what the picture meant to them and the like, and that's part of the real joy of it.
Yeah, it just reminds me, I took a class probably in about 2001 or so at WCC on photography class, and they still have the dark rooms, and we did it as a group process, and the teacher actually critiqued our finished pictures, which was interesting. But yeah, I mean, and then the next thing I knew that it was all digital. Yeah,
it's shocking.
yeah.
It's very it's really, really fascinating, and really cool that it seems like a common thread that we've all been discussing is working with the hands, and how that can be really meaningful. And so Mark mentioned photography and that process, and then Barb mentioned like using the wood working, and then Taylor's mentioning crafting, and I remember the process of pottery. I took this one pottery class in high school, and there's like the molding, but then there's like the scoring and slipping and attaching things, and then the
Mhm.
putting it in the kiln, and sometimes things blow up in the kiln and you have to start over, and then you got to glaze, and all of that process takes time, but it's like very grounding because it can't be rushed, you know.
Mhm.
And you have to really be focused and really connected. And then yeah, sometimes like after or during that process, there are a lot of moments to connect with others about it,
Mhm.
which is really great.
Yeah, it almost becomes like a form of communication, like Barb was saying earlier. And I find it's a communication with myself, and then when I'm doing it with others, it's a way that we can connect with each other on kind of like a different level than a normal interaction.
Mhm. Is a skill level. Actually, I'm interested in hearing you talk about your writing poetry, because we talked about the visual arts so far, but not about writing. How do you find your, how do you do that?
Yeah, so writing, it usually comes from a place of uh, naming my experiences or storytelling. Um, and I I like poetry because sometimes um, I can, if it makes sense, I can describe something more clearly in metaphor than, like, that's the only way I can express it sometimes. Like, this feels like this, and that's so at the feelings level, I'm able to like put that on paper and process it, even though I might not have the literal pinpoint words for it. Um, so that's why poetry is helpful for me, because I can describe things in ways that are easy for me to um, connect with, like, um, and sometimes I don't write poetry daily. I might write it weekly or monthly, but I find that emotionally, um, it's it helps me to sort through um, current emotions, but also things that might be coming up from my past that I'm trying to unpack.
Mm.
And then that pairs really well with my therapy, because then I can bring a poem to therapy and be like, hey, this is like how I processed it.
Mhm.
So yeah, it just kind of fits with the
Mhm.
releasing of things. Um, it's like the mental releasing, whereas dance might be like my physical releasing of emotions from my body. Um, poetry is like the mental releasing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's an association going on there where the words associate with different things.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit like what I was trying to describe, when the colors, you have to get the balance of colors, and one color can influence another and you have to adjust it.
Yeah. Yeah, like the other day I was trying to put something into words, and the only thing I can come up with is like, this kind of feels like a deflated tire, like a flat tire. And that was kind of like the emotion coming into like a visual, like,
Mhm.
which was really helpful, you know? That's how I processed it. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that I said before was that, you know, words have often been difficult for me to find and to relearn language at an early age and so on. But that's artistic expression as well. It doesn't have to be graphic, it can be verbal or written. But one thing about colors, I know I once was in second grade, I guess. I took a crayon on a piece of paper and just scribbled it dark to I don't know, it was internal, but I had to let people know when I couldn't talk that this is what I had experienced. And I was looking through some stuff that I have in all my junk that I have in the house. It's been gathering for 50 odd years, but I found a later picture where I had apparently put down a bunch of bright colors, and then I covered them with black crayon, and then I took like some kind of tool and scraped off some of the black to you know, let the colors come out, I guess. So it's just interesting to me as I think about the various things that have happened over the last century in terms of our artistic growth, I guess.
Mhm. One of the things that I've done, and I did it at actually Fresh Start several years ago, was a project called Photo Voice, and we would take pictures. This was still back with emulsion cameras, so you can tell how long ago it was. And people would give them people a point and shoot camera and say, you know, go take pictures of things that represent something to you. And then we'd have them, we'd develop them. And then you could construct a story around the picture, you know, and we'd record the stories. And then you could take the picture and the story and have a sort of narrative as well as a graphic representation. And that's really interesting. And was a process that took some time and patience, but it was really, and it helped to develop really close relationships with the people in the group, because they would learn things about each other in the process that they didn't know before, even though they had been at the clubhouse all together for many months or, you know, even sometimes years. So it was a way of getting at a deeper level. So.
I don't know why I'm thinking of this now, but there was a period in my life before I was in the state hospital where I was enthralled by M.C. Escher's work. And when I got to the hospital, in the hallway, I spread out this huge piece of paper and I started trying to remember some of the things that he had drawn. And one was, you know, a picture of fish-like creatures that were all kind of meshed together. And so there I was, like, on the floor trying to recreate these fish, and I was coloring them red. I don't know why red, but anyway. I guess it was something to do, so I wasn't doing other more destructive things to myself. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely brings about wellness and channeling of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe Taylor, you can speak more about like the newsletter,
Oh,
and how we have like at Fresh Start within the Fresh Prince newsletter, we have like wellness articles. And then we also have coloring pages that Taylor beautifully creates, handmade, which I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that process, Taylor, how long they take, because they're so detailed and amazing.
Thank you. You know, the time kind of just seems to go away from me when I'm doing things like that. And anything creative that I'm doing tends to kind of meet me where I'm at, emotionally, physically. You know, if I'm in a really bad space, there's still something creative that I can do. And that kind of ties into, yeah, our newsletter at Fresh Start. Each week we have a new newsletter, and each week members are given the opportunity to sign up for different newsletter tasks. And so that really is great for members. It meets members where they're at each week, and gives them an opportunity to explore their creativity and how their creativity is impacted by or affects their mental health challenges. There's a lot of components to the newsletter. There's just writing the articles, which is a creative process in itself, as we talked about with creative writing. There's designing the document, and putting in like visual elements, putting in illustration, art. And then there's this opportunity with the newsletter to know that what you're doing is given to everyone at the clubhouse. So you are connecting with everyone in a really special way.
Yeah, I talked to someone that I've known for a long time who's a member at Fresh Start, and he just really appreciates the opportunity to try to write an article. So that's really a positive experience for him, I think.
do people talk, Taylor, do people talk about the things they've done? And is there kind of an exchange of, ideas about, and communication between people over the newsletter?
Yeah. There's like the meetings themselves where we all kind of work together and come up with ideas, and it's a really supportive environment. And I think that's part of the reason why we get such great content, is because it's, no matter what, it's just well received, and it's, people are very grateful for it. And then there's also, outside of the meetings, people will just bring up that like something really touched them in the newsletter articles that week. And it allows us to communicate with each other and to kind of build new relationships around things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful kind of activity when people can connect in that way.
Absolutely.
Well, great. I want to say, at this same institution where I was telling you about, there was cottages. Everyone lived in a cottage, and in the cottage was a large meeting room, and it was all for boys, so it was kind of male identified, and each cottage had a pool table, and pool is seen as a comfortable male kind of place at that time. It was gendered, very highly gendered. But in the process of playing that game, you could communicate with people much more easily and develop skills and talk about, you know, how to do it and exchange information. How would you make this shot? And it was this kind of a safe space and this is in an environment, this was in the 60s where it was not common for at that time for men and boys to have a comfortable space for exchanging information, believe it or not, except for sports. And this was a kind of sport activity. But I still count it as a kind of creative set of skills because it was communication, and it was a difficult skill to do. I still remember that as a kind of interesting experience.
Mhm.
My dog is barking. There's dogs out in front. So,
Okay.
well, so how can we get people to talk about more about creative activity and encourage other people to share their experiences? Do you have any ideas? Because I'd like to do more of this and have people, you know, one of the things, for example, Ashley, that when you were talking about poetry is how important it is to hear the poetry and not just read it.
Mm.
Because when you think of it, rhymes and other kinds of poetic line breaks and things don't make any sense until you start to read them. And you get the rhythm of the words, and it's very hard to hear a rhythm in reading to yourself silently. So that's something I thought of when you were talking about poetry, is how important it is to hear it and not just to read it.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are like folks who really appreciate the art form of spoken word
Mm-hmm.
and being able to read that poetry aloud. And then there are other folks who, you know, just journal and it is a personal self-reflective process. Not so yeah, there's definitely both ends of the spectrum where the poem is created and it's kept, or the poem is like shared verbally, orally, so that other people can connect with the words. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts about how we could give our discussion some legs and get other people involved, and maybe reading their stories, maybe reading some of the stuff from your Clubhouse newsletter, as well as any stories. NAMI has its own newsletter, and their stories, and they're very much different when you hear them than when you read them. So.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes there tends to be a barrier with people, or at least this is what I hear when newer people come to our newsletter meetings. They say, but I might not be good at that. Or, you know, and I think like that's a barrier for people because it's really not about being good or bad. It's about the experience of doing it. And I think if we can, as creative individuals, be that voice that reassures people that that could be really integral into getting more people to be involved with creative practices and discussing it, and you know, yeah.
Definitely the emphasis on the like process and connections rather than the perfection.
Right.
I'd love for everyone to see some of the things that you've drawn, Barb, but I know we can't, it's hard to show it on this video format, but maybe that's something we could do with some of your work. And I have some pictures I could share as well. So I think it's useful to start off. I mean, once you see people see that some people go first, and it's easier then to follow. So maybe we could do something like that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we should get together and then each of us bring something that we've done for the next video and just do it ourselves. And maybe invite someone else, Taylor from Fresh Start, or Barb, we can find someone from NAMI. There's the rock painting project. I always like that because I love the idea of painting rocks somehow. That really appeals to me.
Yeah. Did you, well, this is just sort of off on the side, but the rocks that were painted and the paints and so on were stashed outside the office and somebody took them.
I hope they used them in good spirit then.
Yeah, yeah. We're not sure exactly what happened, but they're gone.
Well, maybe we could get them to show us what they did with them.
Yeah,
I'd be
yeah,
perfectly fine with somebody taking the paints and the rocks. That's, as
yeah,
long as we can get them to show us what they did.
yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. So I'm going to stop the recording and let's just figure out where we want to go next. Okay. Okay.